Why you should stop caring about perfection, Montaigne's wisdom. What if I told you that your obsession with being perfect is actually the thing keeping you from becoming your best self? That every time you chase flawlessness, you're not getting closer to excellence, you're moving further away from your humanity. That's the paradox we're diving into today, and it's one that Michel de Montaigne, one of the greatest philosophers the world has ever known, understood centuries ago. He didn't wear a cape or drop million-dollar challenges, but he did challenge something far more dangerous than a YouTube algorithm, the illusion that we must always be more than we are. And I promise you, if you're someone who feels like you're never enough, who's always trying harder, pushing further, afraid to mess up, afraid to be seen as anything less than flawless, this might be the most important idea you've ever heard. Let's start with a deep question. What if perfection isn't real? I don't mean that as a motivational quote. I mean, really think about it. What if the perfect body, the perfect relationship, the perfect career, the perfect version of yourself you're chasing literally does not exist? What if it's a mirage, an image created by your own imagination and reinforced by a world that profits from your insecurity? Montaigne believed that to be human was to be messy, uncertain, contradictory. He wasn't interested in selling an ideal. He was obsessed with understanding what it meant to be real, to be flawed, to be alive.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
And yet, we live in a culture where perfection is the currency of self-worth. Just scroll through your feed. Perfect smiles, perfect skin, perfect routines, perfect homes. But what you don't see are the breakdowns, the doubts, the nights spent in silence wondering if any of it means anything. And the more we consume these polished fragments of life, the more we begin to believe that anything less than perfect is failure. That if we show weakness, we'll be judged. That if we make mistakes, we'll be exposed. That if we slow down, we'll be left behind. This is where Montaigne comes in like a philosophical wrecking ball. He didn't just accept imperfection, he celebrated it. He wrote essays about his own fears, his confusion, his body, his bowel movements. Yes, seriously. Not because he wanted to shock people, but because he understood that we connect not through our strengths, but through our flaws. That the more honest we are about our imperfections, the more human we become. He said, "I study myself more than any other subject. That is my metaphysics, that is my physics." He turned inward, not to find perfection, but to accept himself fully as he was. Not some idealized version, not some impossible standard, just him. And here's the thing, that kind of honesty is rare, it's radical, because to admit that you're not perfect in a world obsessed with perfection is an act of courage, it's a rebellion, and it's also the beginning of freedom. When you stop trying to be perfect, you make space to be real. You stop performing and start living. You stop filtering your life and start feeling it. You stop chasing an impossible ideal and start embracing the beautiful complexity of who you actually are. But wait, doesn't that mean we should just stop trying? Settle for mediocrity? Not care about growth? Absolutely not. This is where so many people misunderstand Montaigne's wisdom. He wasn't saying, don't improve. He was saying, don't lose your soul in the pursuit of improvement. There's a difference between striving to grow and punishing yourself for not being perfect. One comes from love, the other comes from fear. One builds you, the other breaks you. So let's ask another question. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be whole? Really imagine it. You would take more risks. You would speak more honestly. You wouldn't be paralyzed by fear of failure because failure would no longer define you. You'd learn faster, connect deeper, love harder, and most importantly, you'd finally get to rest. Not because you gave up, but because you finally understood there's nothing wrong with being unfinished. In fact, being unfinished is the most honest thing you can be, because we're all in process. We're all becoming. Montaigne wrote, "We are all patchwork, and so shapeless and diverse in composition that each bit, each moment plays its own game." That's not weakness, that's reality. And the moment we accept that, we stop trying to control the narrative and start participating in it, not as perfect characters, but as authentic ones. Not as marble statues, but as living, breathing, beautifully flawed human beings. So here's the challenge. Can you go one day without trying to be perfect? Just one. Can you let yourself be messy, contradictory, unfinished, and still worthy? Can you show up as you are and trust that it's enough? Because maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need your perfection. Maybe it needs your presence, your vulnerability, your honesty. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real greatness begins. The mask of perfection, how our fear of judgment destroys authenticity. Imagine walking through life wearing a mask every single day. A mask that smiles when you're exhausted, that stays silent when you want to scream, that says, "I'm fine," when you're falling apart inside. Now, imagine that mask becoming your identity, not because you want it to, but because you're terrified of what people might say if you took it off. That's the price of perfection. It's not just internal pressure, it's a performance for an audience we never actually see, but always feel watching. And the more we lean into that performance, the further we drift from ourselves. Montaigne saw this long before social media, long before influencers, long before the digital age weaponized our insecurities. He saw that the pursuit of perfection isn't about excellence. It's about fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being exposed as insufficient, unworthy, or just plain human. The irony is that we think perfection protects us. We believe that if we can just appear flawless, we'll be safe, respected, admired, loved. But perfection is not armor, it's a prison. It locks us inside a version of ourselves that isn't real, and worse, it convinces us that showing who we really are is dangerous. So we edit, we curate, we present, and slowly we begin to believe that our unfiltered selves aren't worthy of being seen, that our doubts, our contradictions, our insecurities must be hidden at all costs. But here's a question Montaigne would have asked us today. What if the parts of you that you're hiding are actually the parts that make you lovable? Think about it. Who do you feel most connected to? Is it the person who always has the right answer, never makes mistakes, and looks like they've got it all figured out? Or is it the person who lets you see their struggle, who admits when they're scared, who laughs at their own failures and still shows up anyway? Authenticity is magnetic. It draws us in because it reflects something we recognize in ourselves. We don't fall in love with people because they're perfect. We fall in love because they're real. But to be real, we have to risk being seen. Fully seen, and that's terrifying. Because somewhere along the way, we learned that being judged is the worst possible outcome, that standing out, being different, messing up in public means social death. And so we try to blend in, we try to please, we try to be what we think others want us to be. But in that process, we lose ourselves. We become echoes of expectations, shadows of ideals, never quite at home in our own skin. Montaigne refused to play that game. He didn't write to impress, he wrote to understand. He didn't hide his contradictions, he explored them. He didn't pretend to be wise, he questioned everything. And in doing so, he gave us permission to drop the act, to stop striving to be a polished statue and start embracing the raw clay of our own becoming. He wrote, "If I speak differently of myself than I do of others, it is because I know myself better than I know them. But I would not have anyone believe that I know myself perfectly." That sentence holds more honesty than most of what we see today, and it's that kind of honesty that sets us free. So let's ask another uncomfortable question. Who are you when no one's watching? When there's no audience to impress, no algorithm to please, no pressure to perform? What remains? And more importantly, what would it take for you to bring that self into the light? Not because it's perfect, but because it's true, because it's yours, because it's enough. The fear of judgment will always be there. The voice that tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, that voice isn't going away anytime soon. But you don't have to obey it. You don't have to let it dictate your life. You can choose to show up anyway, to speak anyway, to be seen anyway. And in doing so, you send a message not just to the world, but to yourself. I no longer need to be perfect to be worthy of love, belonging, or respect. And here's where it gets powerful. When you drop the mask, you don't just free yourself, you free others. You give them permission to do the same. You create a space where people can breathe, where they can stop pretending, where they can say, "Me too," instead of, "I must keep up." That's how authenticity spreads, not through perfection, but through courage. Montaigne didn't live a perfect life, he lived an examined one. And maybe that's the real goal, not to be flawless, but to be honest, not to impress, but to express, not to perform, but to connect. Because at the end of the day, no one remembers us for our perfection. They remember us for our presence, for how we made them feel, for how deeply we allowed ourselves to be human. The freedom of imperfection, how letting go unleashes real growth. There's a strange kind of freedom that only comes when we let go of the need to be perfect. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins in small, trembling moments when we admit we don't know what we're doing, when we forgive ourselves for falling short, when we stop pretending we're further along than we really are. That's when something cracks open inside us, and in that space, real growth begins. Not the kind of growth that looks good on a resume or a profile picture, but the kind that transforms who we are from the inside out. Montaigne understood this better than most. He knew that perfection was not only unreachable, but also unnecessary. He believed that embracing our flaws wasn't a barrier to growth, it was the very condition for it. We've been taught that growth is linear, that it's a series of steps, each one cleaner and more impressive than the last. But real growth is chaotic, it's messy. It looks like progress one day and collapse the next. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, then sideways, then falling down and getting up again. And if we're obsessed with being perfect, we never give ourselves the room to stumble. We never allow ourselves to learn, because to learn is to admit you don't know. To grow is to admit you're not there yet. And perfection has no patience for that kind of humility. But here's the secret. Humility is where the magic happens. When we strip away the illusion of having it all together, we begin to access a deeper kind of power. The kind that isn't about control, but about awareness, about presence, about being so grounded in who you really are that you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. That's when growth becomes authentic. It's no longer driven by fear or comparison or shame. It's driven by curiosity, by love, by the desire to become more yourself, not some idealized version of a perfect human. Montaigne didn't write as someone who had arrived at the final truth. He wrote as someone still walking the path, still fumbling through life, still learning. That's what gave his work its depth. He wasn't preaching from a mountaintop. He was inviting us into his process. And in doing so, he made space for our process too. He showed us that you don't need to be finished to be worthy. You don't need to be flawless to be wise. You just need to be honest, open, willing to look at yourself without flinching. So ask yourself this: where in your life are you holding back because you're waiting to be perfect first? Is it that project you haven't started? The conversation you're afraid to have? The part of yourself you're scared to reveal? What if the very thing you're avoiding is the thing that would set you free, not because it would go perfectly, but because it would finally be real? We don't grow by avoiding the cracks. We grow by stepping into them, by letting the light in, by realizing that perfection isn't the goal, integration is. Wholeness is. Letting go of perfection doesn't mean settling. It means shifting your definition of success. It means choosing honesty over image, depth over polish, meaning over performance. It means realizing that the people who matter most in your life don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. They need you to show up, not as some unreachable ideal, but as the full, messy, evolving human you are. And maybe most importantly, you need that too. You need to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm not perfect, and that's okay. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm here. That's the foundation of real confidence, not arrogance, not bravado, but the quiet, grounded knowing that you are enough, even as you become more Montaigne. Trusted the process of becoming. He trusted that by examining his life, by reflecting deeply, by embracing his contradictions, he would grow, not into someone perfect, but into someone true. That trust is something we can all reclaim. We don't have to be perfect to be at peace, we just have to be real, flawed and fearless. Why embracing imperfection is the ultimate strength. There's a quiet revolution that begins the moment we stop resisting our flaws. We've spent so much of our lives believing that to be strong is to be unbreakable, that to lead is to never falter, that to be admirable is to be untouched by failure. But this idea of strength is brittle. It shatters the moment life becomes real, the moment grief hits, or love unravels, or the plan falls apart. True strength, the kind that sustains us through chaos and loss and doubt, doesn't come from being flawless. It comes from being fearless in the face of our flaws. It comes from knowing you are breakable and still choosing to show up. That's the kind of strength Montaigne lived. That's the kind of strength we need now more than ever. When you embrace your imperfections, you stop living in fear of being seen. That fear, The fear of being found out, of being judged, of not measuring up. It's exhausting. It makes you shrink. It makes you apologize for your existence. But when you lean into your imperfections, something powerful happens. You become untouchable in the most paradoxical way. Not because you're perfect, but because you're no longer trying to be. You've disarmed the critics by agreeing with them. Yes, I'm flawed. Yes, I'm inconsistent. Yes, I'm still figuring it out. And somehow that honesty makes you unshakable, because now you're grounded in something real. Imagine what your life could be if you stopped hiding the parts of you that you've been taught to be ashamed of. Imagine walking into a room and not wondering if you're too much or not enough. Imagine no longer needing to impress people who don't even know your story. That's what Montaigne meant when he said, "I want to be seen for who I am, not for who I pretend to be." He wasn't advocating for recklessness. He was pointing to a deeper kind of courage, the courage to be fully known. And that's the ultimate paradox. The more we embrace our flaws, the more fearless we become. Not because we stop caring, but because we start caring about the right things. We stop chasing approval and start living with intention. We stop performing and start connecting. We stop hiding and start healing. That's what makes a life meaningful, not how polished it looks, but how true it feels. You see, perfection isolates us. It keeps us trapped inside ourselves, constantly comparing, constantly calculating, constantly afraid. But imperfection connects us. It reminds us that we're not alone, that our struggles are not unique, but shared, that the very things we think disqualify us from love or success or belonging are often the things that make us most human, most relatable, most powerful. So here's the final and perhaps most important question. What version of your life could you finally live if you stopped waiting to be perfect first? What art could you create? What relationship could you repair? What dream could you pursue, not because you're guaranteed to succeed, but because you're no longer afraid to fail? Montaigne's legacy isn't a system or a solution, it's a mirror that invites us to look at ourselves honestly, without flinching, without judgment, without shame. He reminds us that to be human is not to be perfect. It's to be in process, to be growing, to be becoming. And when we stop resisting that truth, when we finally embrace our flaws as part of the fabric of who we are, we unlock a kind of strength that no failure can take away. So let the world chase its filtered illusions. Let others perform their perfect lives. You, on the other hand, you can choose something more honest, more powerful, more free. You can choose to be flawed, and in doing so, you can finally become fearless. Because in the end, it's not your perfection that people will remember. It's your presence, your honesty, your willingness to be seen, not as an ideal, but as a whole, imperfect, radiant human being. And that, my friend, is more than enough.